Om Bhurvah Swaha Tatsaviturvarenyam Bhargo Devasya Dhimahi Dhiyo Yona Jaya Shriman Narayana. Very good. Wonderful. Well, again, I thank everyone for being here. We have had so many people joining us, again, both here but also online. This is by far the best conference that we have ever had, both as far as quality and quantity, both. So again, I thank you all for being here. What I'm going to be talking about today is the Ashtanga Yoga system as a sadhana. And the reason why I'm going to be talking about this is because, as people have seen thus far with the talks that have taken place, but also with the talks that are going to take place, both after my talk today, but tomorrow as well, the main ingredient for what it means to be close to God is not merely philosophy, it's not merely theory, it's not merely wishful thinking, it's doing. It's doing more than anything. How do we know God? It's by serving God. How do we know God? It's by practicing those time-honored means by which, again, we can experience God in the here and now. You know, it's interesting, of course, human beings for so long, since the very beginning of time, have always asked, how do I know God? How do I experience God? Is there a God even? Etc. And this is the very simple answer to this question. First of all, indeed, there is a God. If there weren't a God, we wouldn't even have the ability to ask the question, is there a God? Indeed, our intelligence does not come merely from ourselves. Our body does not come from ourselves. There is a source to all things. But now, how do we know God in the immediate? What does it even mean to know God? Well, again, to know God can mean philosophical. You know, I've told this story in the past how I was interviewed in the year 2000 by ITV, Indian television, and it was a call-in show. And this was in New York, and it was very interesting. One person called in, and in a somewhat challenging way, asked me very specifically, how do we prove God exists? How do we prove this? And my answer to him became somewhat historic. I looked into the camera, and I said to the person, God, proof for God's existence is very easy, actually. I've had professors who have proved God's existence just using a whiteboard, doing symbolic logic. That's not the important question. The important question is this. Let's say that indeed that there were some philosopher who could come up with a very simple one-sentence formula that so proves God's existence that upon looking at that simple one sentence, the biggest atheist on earth can say, okay, I guess that's it. You've proven God's existence. All right. Well, if this person were an intelligent atheist, what would be his next question? It would be this. All right, you've proven God's existence. Now what? Now what? That's nice. All right, I accept now that the proposition that God does not exist is false. The proposition that God does exist is true. Now what? What do I do with my life? Does that mean I'm going to change my life? Not necessarily. You see, it's one thing intellectually to prove something, but ultimately, how does that thing, how does the transcendent, the divine, God, truly have importance to us as living beings through experience? In other words, we must experience the presence of God in such a way that our very life is transformed in such a way that now, having had that experience of the presence of God there before us, we are no longer the same. We are now fundamentally changed in such a way that it's not merely that intellectually we know that God exists. It's not even enough, interestingly, that we've now experienced God's existence. but more, that we have so experienced the life-transforming existence of God in such a way that now anyone who encounters us, their life is transformed for the better. This is how we change the world. This is how we change the world, that we become beings such that when people meet us, they know God exists. Imagine that. Imagine that. That when they encounter us, they encounter beings who are so at peace, who are so wise, who are so good, who ourselves, we are manifesting God's grace through us in such a way that when they meet us, they want to change. Imagine that. This is how we change the world fundamentally. Not just politics, not just economics, not just social tinkering here and there. But we become beings such that when anyone encounters us, they want to change, and they do change. Just imagine this effect upon the world. Now, all this begs the question, of course. How do we experience God? How do we presence God in our life in a living way? This is what is called sadhana. Sadhana very simply means practice. Practice. That's what this very short but very important Sanskrit word means. So let me talk very simply and very quickly about what is sadhana before we go into the, let's say, the substance of our talk today. Sadhana is indeed practice. When there is something of importance that you want to acquire in your life, you know, how many people here are educated or successful, or you've started businesses, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, or you've gone to the gym and worked out, you know, or you've acquired some skill. You know how to play an instrument. You know how to play anything, guitar, violin, anything like this. How do you acquire this? Practice, practice, practice. What does this mean? You want to go to college, get a bachelor's degree, master's, PhD. You want to become an MD. You want to have a good business. You want to do something like this. You want to learn an instrument. You want to learn a martial art. What do you do? Is it something that comes about simply due to wishful thinking? You say, oh yes, I've never thrown a punch in my life. I want to have a black belt. I'll have it by the end of the day. No. Practice, practice, practice. And all of the elements of practice that must be there that we'll talk about a little bit later. Well, in the same way, interestingly, the way that we reform ourselves, and what does that mean? That we rid ourselves of the negative and that we discover the positive, the good that is given to us by God that is there within. The way that we do this is through practice, in the same way that you want to become an expert at violin every day for hours a day. No excuse. You practice. In the same way, we practice experiencing God. So this is what is known as sadhana. I had this very interesting phrase come to me yesterday. I quickly wrote it down. I'm just going to read this to you. Sadhana is the perfect coming together of doing and being. This is a phrase that just came to me, actually. I'm sure it's going to be an aphorism in the future book. Let me read this again. Sadhana is the perfect coming together of doing and being. Let me explain what I mean by this. This is what spiritual practice is. That, again, you are doing. It's motion. Just like Purushottama a short time ago gave a beautiful demonstration of how to do puja. We are doing. We are exerting ourselves to perfect ourselves, to know God, to serve God. So it is a motion. It is a process of action, of doing, in which we're doing meditation, we're doing ritual, we're doing puja. We are making ourselves become ethical people, etc., etc., etc. But at the same time, it's not just a doing like working with a hammer. It's not just a doing like working with a computer. But rather, the difference between other worldly activities and spiritual practice is that it is a doing, yes, but it's also a being. So in other words, we are doing, we are active, we are being disciplined, etc. on the one hand, but on the other hand, with the idea of doing in stillness, doing in peace, doing in calm, doing with devotion. So what is perfect spiritual practice, perfect sadhana? It is precisely this, that we are active, again, we are disciplined, we have our meditation, that we know this is my meditation, I must do this each day, etc. But at the same time, while engaging in the sadhana, within we are centered, within we are aware. We are aware of ourselves and who we truly are, but more than anything, and this is the key to sadhana, to spiritual practice, we are centered upon God at all times. So thus, for example, what is the perfect, actually, example of this doing and being? Meditation itself. In meditation, you see, if you're watching someone meditate, what are you seeing? Externally, seemingly not much. You're seeing a person doing this. You're seeing a person in silence, in stillness. Now, is the person doing nothing? Absolutely not. Internally, what are they doing? Internally, they are disciplining themselves. Internally, especially if they are a beginning meditator. Oh, they're struggling with their mind. They're struggling with their demons. They're trying to make themselves focus, etc. From the outside, it may seem like, oh, the person's just like a rock. Internally, there's almost a war going on with the mind, correct? Because the mind won't cooperate. The mind wants to float this way and that way. There's so much going on. But at the same time, what is that person actually doing? They are doing the process of meditation, that is, endeavoring to still the mind, and in that stillness, realizing, experiencing their true self, their true Atman, their true soul, and then more in time experiencing the presence of God. So they are engaging both simultaneously in the action of doing, but in absolute stillness. This is the perfect description of what is actual sadhana. This coming together of both. So what does this mean? Well, it's interesting. Let's go a little bit deeper into this, actually. We have Patanjali, who, of course, wrote the Yoga Sutras. How did he describe the process of doing anything spiritual, whether yoga or meditation or anything like this? He explained that there are two things, correct? What are they? Yes, please.
In Sanskrit?
In the Sanskrit.
Abhyasa and Vairagya.
Very good. Abhyasa, Vairagya. In order to practice spirituality successfully, you have to have first Abhyasa. What does this mean? Simple practice. In other words, there is no practice without the actual practice. It's not wishful thinking. It means that when it's time to meditate, to sit, to do what you need to do, you do what you need to do. Again, just like any sort of acquisition. Again, you want to learn an instrument, you practice. There is no practice without the actual practice. And sometimes you feel like it, sometimes you do not. Sometimes you woke up grouchy that day. Sometimes, oh, you didn't get enough sleep. Oh, it's a really busy day. I really have a lot to do, etc. Every excuse that can be there. But no, you practice daily. So first, abhyasa, practice. But now comes the stillness part, vairagya. Also with detachment. So without worry about the result, without worry about, oh, am I doing this perfectly right now? And, oh, my mind's not cooperating. No. In peace, you practice. So again, this is the fundamental essence of what it means to engage in spiritual practice. And again, really by extension, interestingly, any practice. You know, I go to the gym all the time. I lift weights, you know. Any weightlifter knows this. Oh, you practice. There's no not going to the gym. No, it's time to go to the gym. Oh, I don't feel like it. No, you go. There's the practice. On the other hand, when you're there, you're focused with awareness. Your mind is not on a million other things. You are here. You are feeling your breathing. You are feeling your muscles as you're lifting. You're trying to focus the tension in a certain way, etc. There's that detachment where you are there, present, as you're doing. You bring together these two things perfectly, and you have a practice, whatever that practice is, either material or spiritual. But now dealing with the spiritual, yes, indeed, we must have both. We have to actually do our sadhana, but at the same time, with that stillness of detachment. Understanding that, you know, people in different ways will often ask me questions along these lines. Oh, how long does it take to have self-realization? How long does it take to know God, etc.? And Sometimes I'll try to be a little smart and I'll answer them in this way. I'll say, it takes for as long as you no longer have to ask that question in your own mind. In other words, when you can come to the point where you realize that our progress spiritually is not just dependent on the quantitative element. It's not just a matter of time. It's not just a matter of, oh, how many years? How long will this take? It's dependent upon the grace of God. And when we can come to the point where we realize that time, my goal is to know God. Now, you want to bring in time? That can happen in 1 second. That can happen in a million years. As far as time, do not care about the time. Understand that time is in God's hands. Everything is in God's hands. And if we have, again, this detached attitude of stillness, of faith, of surrender, understanding that, God, when will I come to fully know you? When you desire that I come to fully know you. Not when I desire, due to my over-eagerness or impatience or whatever it is. Within the context of infinity, even a million years is the blink of an eye. So thus, when will we come to that perfection, that ultimate peace of knowing ourselves perfectly, but also knowing God, knowing the divine? Surrender and simply leave that up to the divine. And it will happen when he so chooses, and that time will be perfect when it happens. Now, talking about yoga very specifically. So there is the Ashtanga system. And for those who know the Ashtanga system, and I'll go into what the various limbs are. This is the 8-limbed yoga, very specifically. That is the yoga that we follow. Specifically, the ISTS. We follow the Ashtanga system. That is the 8 limbs of yoga, as taught by Patanjali. But we follow it perfectly, and that is also permeated with bhakti. The purpose of the talk today is to explain how yoga is synonymous with sadhana, with actual spiritual practice. And first of all, one way in which we can see this is that there are several shared elements that are there when practicing yoga, and specifically Ashtanga Yoga, but then that must also be present when we're doing any spiritual practice, any sadhana. So let me discuss just a few of these, and this is a small list of what's really a more expansive list. So when we're doing spiritual practice, when we're doing meditation, yoga, anything like this is what we need to cultivate in ourselves. First and foremost, discipline. We have to be disciplined individuals. That is, we have to have self-discipline. What does that mean? That means self-mastery. That means, on top of this, very simply, this is the definition. When I choose that I will do X, I will do X. Now that sounds pretty simple, doesn't it? It sounds like what everyone does, right? Is it what everyone does? No, not necessarily. You see, in fact, if everyone truly had that ability, my Lord, we'd be pretty much living in a perfect world with perfect beings. But this is the difficulty. Most people struggle with discipline. That, oh, I know I should be disciplined and do this. But then to know that and then to follow through, of course, are two different things. What does it mean to be truly disciplined? That what I will, I do. And there is no distinction between the two. I will that I will do this, and again, choose anything. I will be at the gym for an hour a day, 5 days a week. Well, that's my will. Will I do it? If you're disciplined, you will. You see, so again, this is the very definition of discipline. And discipline of necessity can only be self-imposed. See, we're not children. We don't need to be disciplined. Rather, we need discipline. We need our own discipline. It can only be something that's self-imposed. So this is the first element that must be there if we are going to be people who make progress in life in any way, but especially we're talking about spiritually. All right. The next thing is routine. Routine. So what does it mean to have a spiritual practice? Does it mean that as the weeks go by, the months, the years, you do your spiritual practice just kind of when you feel like it, when the inspiration strikes you, etc.? No, you have this daily routine in which you do your sadhana. So this is why, my students know this is something that I stress. We do our sadhana every day. Every day we do meditation. Every day we do puja, etc., etc. And even if we're not feeling well, this is what it means to do sadhana, is that you have routine, 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 no excuses. Repetition. Now, this is the part that takes patience. Because again, what does it mean to have a practice of any kind? Oh, you're going to be repeating, and you're going to be repeating the same thing. Who here has learned the multiplication tables at some point when you were in grade school or something? What are you doing? Yes, you're repeating and repeating, and it's tough because you're repeating, because it can be somewhat boring, etc. And again, all the million examples that I can do. You're in the gym. What are you doing? You're doing reps. You're repeating. You know, there's no variation. It's the same thing all the time. But that repetition is indeed what builds the strength. Anyone, again, who has had any sort of discipline thing that you've done, you know this. It's the repetition that builds the strength in and of itself. So this is true also spiritually. This is why I've joked with people. If repetition were not necessary, then in doing mantra meditation, all you would need to do is, all right, you sit. Om Namo Narayana. All right, my meditation's over. No, what do? You repeat the mantra. Repetition, repetition, repetition. So this also is another very important aspect, both of yoga, of Ashtanga Yoga very specifically, but then also of sadhana in general, making spiritual progress. And can it be boring? At first, again, because we're not disciplined, because we don't necessarily have a very trained mind. But let me guarantee you, it comes to the point that with enough repetition, and speaking now specifically of the spiritual, you meditate every day, even though it's the same routine, it comes to the point where that same meditation that you've done every day for years, it comes to the point where you're looking forward to it. It's sweet. Rather than the idea, oh, time to do this again. No, it comes to the point where you're looking forward to it, like you're looking forward to ice cream. Like you're looking forward to just some kind of sweet. Not everybody likes ice cream, but you get the idea. You're looking forward to something you love. So, very, very important, that repetition. Dedication. Dedication is also something that is crucial. What motivates us to do all this? Because see, everything that I'm talking about, and I'm not missing words, this is hard. Again, this is why how we teach spirituality, it's not new agey, it's not commercial. No, it's hard. And we tell people that off the bat. It's not wish fulfillment. No, you want to know God? Oh, you must have, now what are we talking about? Dedication. This is what gives us our motivation to go on, that we are dedicated to our practice. And why are we dedicated to our practice? See, it's one thing to say this, oh, you must have dedication. But even with dedication, there must be motivation for the dedication. What is that motivation? Well, what motivates us in life to evolve spiritually? We've had some experience in the past. We've read about, sages, saints in the past who their lives were transformed. Now we're motivated, we're inspired. That now gives us the dedication that's necessary to do everything I've just been speaking about, to do that repetition, that routine, that self-discipline in such a way that little by little we begin to experience the presence of God within us. We are dedicated to our practice, and we're dedicated to the practice because knowing God means more to us than anything in existence. And why is that the case? Because we understand that when we know God, God being the source of all reality, God being Jamadhyasya Yataha, that which is literally the source of all things conceivable and perceivable, what greater thing is there to know than that which is the source? Not just the effects, but the cause. When you know God, you know everything. When you have God, you have everything. What are all these desideratives, all these things that we desire as living beings? We want peace, we want happiness, we want pleasure, we want joy, we want wisdom, etc., etc. And understanding that all this can be found not in a million different places, but one place. That one place that is the source of all these things. Now, surrendering our lives at the feet of God, we have all of that. Everything that we have desired deeply within us, all of our existence we now have. That's what motivates us. And that's why we devote ourselves to this path with dedication. Awareness. Awareness is another common element of all spiritual practice, whether yoga or meditation. And that is that everything that we are doing with supreme awareness. This is something I pointed out to people. A few other people have talked about this in the past, but not too many and not to the extent to which they should have. What is a yogi? What is a person who is an accomplished, let's say, meditator, someone who is close to God, someone who is self-realized? One of the elements that such a person has is they have supreme awareness. What does that mean? That means whereas other people are traversing life almost like zombies, to varying degrees, not aware of anything, not aware of what's really happening around them, not aware of others, not aware of even what's happening inside of them, not aware of, all right, now my mind is doing this. Why is my mind doing this? Most people are not aware of any of these processes. The perfected yogi is someone who has supreme awareness. And we've seen this all throughout history. We've seen that the yogi, the person who has truly perfected themselves spiritually, they are simultaneously, and this is what's interesting, with undivided, simultaneous attention, they are aware of themselves, of what's happening within, in their mind, in their emotions. They're aware of their breathing. They're aware of what their body is doing. They're aware of who is around them, what is the internal state of all these beings. They are aware of the environment. They are aware of time. They are aware of history, of why they are sitting there right then and there, of what brought them there. They are aware of their ancestors. They are aware of what is to come, all simultaneously. That is a perfected being. You want to talk about a sage. You want to talk about a Jesus, a Buddha. You want to talk about a rishi, a perfected yogi. That describes them. They may not share that awareness with you because they don't want to overwhelm you, but trust me, they're aware of all things at all times. This also is what we are to cultivate, awareness. And we begin with first that pointed awareness. That is, we become aware of ourselves, again, our true selves, who we are as Atman, and we are aware of God at all times. This is another subsidiary element of awareness, that the yogi is not only aware of everything that I just said, but first and foremost, they are aware of God being there with them at all times in all places. This is our goal as spiritual practitioners. Whether we find ourselves, like right now, here in a beautiful temple, obviously it's easier to be aware of God in a situation like this. Well, what about when you're working? What about when you're driving? What about when you're in a situation where there are 100 million things being thrown at you at once? All sorts of things from every single different direction. Well, guess what? We can be aware of God even then. And that's the goal, is that wherever we find ourselves, whatever the excuse, whether we are sitting in silence in meditation or in a spiritual gathering like this, or whether we're in our office and a million bits of information are being thrown at us and problems and so many things going on, still forefront in our awareness is God, regardless of where we find ourselves in the situation that we're in. Now, all that being said, that's the goal. That's the goal. How do we achieve that goal? See, it's easy to say this, but of course, for most people, oh, we're cultivating that awareness. It's precisely that. We must cultivate that awareness. That's the sadhana. That's the spiritual practice. So by practice, it comes to the point where, indeed, first, just we have this little inkling of the presence of God. Starts slowly. But then it comes to the point where, in time, we have that not only understanding, but that actual experience. I am never separated from God. God is always with me at all times, at every moment, at every second. So awareness. And then finally, the last thing I'm going to speak about as far as the elements of sadhana, and that is ultimately bhakti, devotion. Devotion. If we do not have devotion, then what are we doing spiritually? If we claim that we're spiritual people, we claim that we're on a spiritual path, but we don't have devotion to God, what are we doing? It's ultimately just a kind of self-centered so-called spirituality. Devotion has to be foundation to all of our sadhana, all of our practice. And this being the case, this is how, and now we're going to get quickly into the Ashtanga system. This is how the Ashtanga system, that is the 8 limbs of yoga themselves, can be seen, must be seen, and should be practiced as a sadhana, in that we do all the aspects of yoga permeated with devotion to God. And this means every aspect of yoga, from the most physical to the ethical, to even breathing, how we breathe, to the meditation, to everything. Our motivation should be one thing, and that is to have devotion to God, and more, we must be practicing devotion to God with every spiritual thing we're doing. So again, I'm going to keep pointing to Purushotama's talk that he gave just a short time ago, where he was doing puja demonstration, and he also was repeating this. It's the devotion that's important. It's the devotion that's important. This could not be more true. This is true for every single practice that we do, whether it's offering one little stick of incense, whether it's sitting deep in meditation, whether it's even doing the physical asanas, what in the Western world most people associate with yoga. You're doing the physical postures. Oh, you should have devotion as you're doing these physical postures, etc., etc. So devotion is foundational. Now, all that quickly, because I know I have thrown a lot at people, and at this point I have about 3 minutes left, if even that. So the Ashtanga system are the 8 limbs of yoga. So yama, niyama, asana, pranayama, pratyahara, dharana, dhyana, samadhi. These are the 8 limbs of yoga, and they cover every single aspect of the human experience. Yama and niyama, and I'll go through this quickly. I know I'm throwing a lot of Sanskrit at people. Yama and niyama, very simply being the ethical prescriptions and proscriptions of yoga. So in other words, how to be a good person in the world. Good to yourself, good to others, etc. How to be ethical. So it begins with this. Then there is asana. Now let me talk about asana a little bit, because I was speaking about asana just a minute ago. Indeed, asana is what most people identify with yoga, and that is the actual physical processes that you go through, the actual physical postures that we go through. Well, people who have learned yoga from me, and I'm talking about even the asanas as well, can attest to how even in doing the asanas must be, can be, and must be permeated with devotion, permeated with bhakti. So as we're doing even physical exercise, seemingly externally, we're focused on God. That devotion is there. How do we do this? Very simply, by understanding, why am I doing this? Am I perfecting myself physically just for myself? Just materialistically, just so I can look good when people see me, etc. All these materialistic motivations that most people have. No, this must not be the motivation for even why physically we attempt to perfect ourselves. But rather, the motivation should be that I am doing this in service to God, in service to God, in service to God, etc. Pranayama. Pranayama are the breathing exercises of yoga. And each one of these 8 limbs that I'm going through, I could give a 3-hour talk about. Obviously, I'm giving the smallest little description of all of these. Pranayama also, as we're doing breathing exercises, what are we doing? We are stilling our mind such that we can now understand our own self and awaken our experience of God. So even as we're breathing, if we're doing breath concentration or anuloma viloma or any sort of breath awareness, we do this in such a way that we are thanking God for our very breath itself, etc. Pratyahara. Pratyahara is a very interesting limb of yoga. This means withdrawal of the senses. So in other words, and I'll explain this very, very simply, because it is actually pretty easy to understand. 98% of the time, what are we getting back to awareness? What are we aware of? Everything external, everything we're seeing, hearing, etc., etc. And it is as a result of purely focusing on the external that we do not have peace. Because anxiety comes from outside. Interestingly, anxiety doesn't come from within. The soul is actually perfect. The soul is at peace. Our anxiety, our tension, our stress comes from outside. It comes from what we see, from what we hear, from what we're afraid of, etc., all externalized. Now, 98% of our time, this is how we spend our time. Pratyahara, very simply, is the process of now reversing those senses. Instead of being outward, now let me turn inward to that place of peace. And when we do this with devotion, when we bring ourselves within, understanding that God is everywhere, but also God is especially there within our heart. Hridaya, within the heart region, the heart area. That God himself is with us at all times. Now, when we draw those senses in, we close our eyes, we're in a quiet place, we sit still, so we're not feeling things. In other words, we still the senses. Now we can come to the point where with devotion, we can know our true selves and we can ultimately encounter the self of ourself, and that is God within. So in this way, with devotion, even pratyahara is a sadhana. Then there is dharana. Dharana, very simply, is the process of learning concentration. Again, focus. Another nice way of saying concentration is focus. I actually prefer that word. I've said this before. I think I even have a few aphorisms where I say this, that if you have focus, you can do anything. If you look at any great person in history, whether a general, whether a good politician, a good, let's say, political leader, let's not say politician, a good political leader, a good religious leader. If you look at anyone in history who accomplished something of global magnitude, look at that person's life, you'll see someone who had focused like a laser beam. Not scattered, but who could focus like a laser beam. Well, that is dharana. In the same way, we can learn concentration, but again, motivated by what? Because you see, this is the terrible thing. Are there not also demonic people who have good focus? Oh, yeah. Oh, yes. It's not enough merely to have focus, but rather focus in service to God. You see, everything that we're saying, this is what's interesting. And again, just so little time. Many of these elements that I'm talking about, oh, discipline, focus, etc. Can evil people have these? Oh, yes. Can evil people be intelligent? Oh, you better believe it. They're not wise, but they're intelligent. They can also have all of these things. But what's the difference between the demonic person versus the good person who has all of these elements? Motivation. Why? What is the underpinning of why they want all of those disciplines? The good person dedicates everything that they have and every good internal quality that they have to God. And truly in surrender to God. Their attitude, unlike the demonic person, their attitude is, God, I realize I have these wonderful powers. Oh, I'm disciplined, I'm strong, etc., etc. I wish to use these in your service. That's the difference. And that's the devotional element. And then meditation. Meditation is the very heart of yoga. It is the very heart of sadhana. Indeed, meditation meaning both overtly, that is when we sit down and like I was saying before, when you see the yogi sitting like this, yes, we must each do that every day. We must each have our sadhana where we are sitting either in silence or we can be reciting mantra out loud, either way, but we are doing our actual meditation. So this is dhyana. But more, we do that practice as the foundation for something greater. And that is to eventually come to the point where we can engage in living meditation. In other words, we can be engaged in the world. Oh, we can be engaged in the world like no one is engaged in this world. We can be accomplishing world-changing things, but in a meditative attitude. In other words, at peace. I forgot I was going to bring him up here actually as an example, but do people know this very famous statue of Shiva known as Nataraja? Where, it's the dancing Shiva, and there's like a circle of flames around him. I have the statue downstairs. Please, yeah, real quick, that would be great. But she's going to get the statue. But let me talk about this, and then when you'll see the statue, you'll see exactly what I mean. When you look at this image, It's a very famous image. It's one of the most famous, quote unquote, Hindu images that people know. You'll see Shiva is dancing and his hair is kind of going wild. And there's flames around him. There's fire all around him. In other words, he's engaged in activity in this world. He's doing. But this is what's fascinating. When you look at his face is the epitome of calm and peace. So this is how we also are to be in everyday life. We are to be meditative, and this is Nataraja. He's not enormous, but if you see, and afterwards, if you want, come up and look closely, you'll see, oh, all this activity. But if you look at his face, he's in peace, he's in calm. This is how we are to be, engaged in the world. Again, the yogi, the spiritual person, is not an escapist from this world. We're not using our spirituality as an excuse to turn our backs on the pain of this world. On the contrary, we engage in every way that we can to alleviate the suffering of this world, to work hard, to develop sweat in this world, doing good for others. But internally, we're peaceful. Internally, we are centered. We are aware of what is of ultimate importance. And that is that we are Atman operating on the physical plane, and we have God as our foundation and our grace. It is God's grace that gives us the empowerment by which we can save this world. So this is what true meditation is. That's not just when we're like this in silence, but even as we are doing and even battling in this world for good, we engage in all the physical and mental things we must do, but internally we do everything from a place of calm and surrender to God. And finally, there's Samadhi. This is the last anga, the last limb of yoga. With Samadhi, very simply in Latin, this is called unio mystica. This is the experience, finally, of having that union with the divine. And not that we become God, not that we, quote unquote, merge with God in this impersonalistic sort of way, but no, that we now are realizing God so intimately. I'll state it in that way. So intimately, we are experiencing God in such a real way, in such an immediate way, in such a depthful way, that we are absorbed, our awareness, our consciousness is absorbed upon God, and it comes to the point where it's not just an experience that we have once in a while. In the beginning, we just have glimpses of this, but we want to come to the point where at every moment of the day, we are experiencing God. Regardless of anything happening around us, we feel that unity with God. We feel that lack of separation. We no longer have the sense that, oh, where's God? Oh, God is not here with me right now. We come to the point where we never experience that again. We understand that God is always with us. And again, regardless of anything that is happening, God is always with us. And we not only know that intellectually, we are experiencing it at every moment. That is Samadhi. That is Samadhi. This unio mystica, to use the Latin, this mystical union with God in such a way as, this is how I've explained it actually. This is actually the most perfect and authentic way of understanding what this unio mystica, this union with the divine is like. If you've ever been truly, not infatuated, but truly in love with someone, what does this mean? It means that you have this experience where you don't literally lose yourself. You are still you. You don't lose your identity. But you are so much enraptured in love of the other that you feel almost as if there's no separation between you and your beloved. But at the same time, you're you. You don't lose your identity. In the same way, this is how ultimately we experience Samadhi, or this union with God. We don't lose ourselves. On the contrary, we're still ourselves, but on the contrary, we haven't lost ourselves. We have found ourselves. But we feel so aware of God to the point where sometimes it's as if we have to ask, and we ask so happily, where do I end and God starts, and vice versa? You are so aware of God that God is there in your awareness perpetually. But it's you as a unique individual unit of consciousness. You don't lose yourself, but you are so aware of God in that love that it's in a way as if on the heart level, you and God are one. It's falling in love with God. That's a simple English phrase that we can use to explain what is meant by ultimate Shuddha Bhakti, pure devotion to God. That you don't literally lose yourself, but at the same time, for you, there is nothing but God, just like there is nothing but your beloved. God becomes our beloved. So that is Samadhi. Very good. Are there any questions that anyone would like to ask? Please.
I have a question. I feel like we answered this before. For somebody who is just starting out meditating and say like they really genuinely want to have a relationship with God, but they don't even know what that means or feels like or looks like in the meditation itself, what, like, other than like, I guess, what would they focus on in cultivating? Does that make sense?
Yes, it does make complete sense, actually.
Okay.
Yeah, in other words, how do you remain motivated to experience something that you don't even really 100% understand what the experience is like?
Right, like how do you focus on cultivating that devotion towards God when you don't even know what that?
I'll use simple and almost material examples to explain that. Yeah, how does a person remain motivated? You maybe have had little glimpses of the presence of God, but not much more than that. How do you stay motivated to experience the end goal? You know, what I've been saying, pure love, pure awareness of God, when you haven't really experienced that. Again, it's the same as learning an instrument. For me, I don't know how to play any instrument, but this is what's interesting. I love music. Well, Karatal, sure. I know how to play those. But I love music. I know what is good music when I hear it. I know good music exists. I know what is the nature of good music, that it produces joy upon the part of the person doing the music and the people hearing it. Understanding that end goal, even if I'm not experiencing it right now, I can't, again, pick up an instrument and play it perfectly. You know, I can't even begin. But understanding that end goal, now the element that I use to take myself from where I am now to that end goal, that is faith. Real faith. Not blind faith, not faith in something I don't know, but on the contrary, like I just explained, maybe I can't play music, but I know what true music is. I've experienced it. I know it's worthy of attaining. In the same way, this is how we motivate ourselves. That yes, maybe in the beginning we're having little glimpses, but what does that even mean to be so absorbed in God, in this ecstatic union of God where it's reciprocal, loving relationship, and I feel, I know, I experience that God is with me at all times, etc., etc. This all sounds good, but I haven't experienced that. What does it even mean? Well, we look at those who are experiencing it. We read in the Vedic scriptures about people who have experienced it. We try to understand the words of those people who have explained what the experience is like. Now, using that as the end goal, what is the bridge to carry me from where I am to that end goal? That's faith. I know the end goal is real because people I trust, they've told me and I've seen it in them. I may not be there, but I will use that faith in what I've seen of them to eventually come to that point. You know? Yeah. You know, again, I'll give this experience again. You're the proverbial 90-pound weakling. You know, you've never lifted a weight in your life. You know, little 3-pound dumbbell would be tough for you. You know, you don't know what is the experience of being built. What does that feel like? You literally don't have an idea. But you've seen others who have been to the gym for 10 years. And you look and, oh, wow, I want that. And you've heard the experience of people who are coaching you. That, oh, yes, do this and you'll feel this. And, oh, you'll get there. Then you do it. Again, this is the sadhana. This is the spiritual practice. And really, it's faith. You know, you don't know what that literally is going to feel like from within to eventually come to the point where you have muscles like rocks. You don't know what that feels like, but you know you will feel it. So you have that faith to carry you there. And you don't give up. You'll get there. Just like, oh, you go to the gym, you know what you're doing, you lift weights every day, you do that for several years, you'll get there. You'll get there. Same thing spiritually as well. Answer the question? Very good. Yes, please.
Acharyaji, you mentioned focus. I'm wondering, what are the practical steps one can take to develop that focus, both at the beginning of their journey in their sadhana and then later on down the line as well?
One-pointed awareness. That's the beginning. In other words, let me back up. Remember before I explained how the perfected spiritual person is aware of everything at all times, simultaneously. But the way that you get there is you begin as a practice with one-pointed awareness. In other words, yes, this is how you develop that muscle of focus. You focus on one thing and you do this as a practice. And there are many, many examples, many practices, practical practices that a person can do. A very nice one that I did for about 6 months, which is why, you know, I'm the age I am. I never have had to wear glasses. Trataka, this practice of Trataka, where you focus your eyes without blinking on a flame. This is an actual practice. And it's a little bit more complicated than that, but not much more. You do practices like this, and it will give you focus. So for approximately 6 months, when I forget how old, 12 or 13, something like that, I did this every day for roughly 6 months, where every day I would sit and I would have a ghee wick lamp, and I would have the flame approximately 18 inches from my eyes, and I would, in a very calm way, focus on it and not blink, not blink, not blink, and just keep doing that. Sometimes it took 10 minutes, and I would not blink until finally tears simultaneously, very quickly, come down from the eyes. Then you close your eyes and you rest. This is a practice known as Trataka. And this will give you focus. But again, it's one of many, many practices. But this is a very powerful one. And again, it's one that I'm very familiar with because I did it. And I don't wear contacts. I don't wear glasses. You know, my vision is not perfect, but pretty close to it. But also it develops focused awareness. Is there anyone online who has any questions?
Yes, this one's from Rajaram. Namaste Acharyaji. I offer my humble obeisances unto you. Is the eightfold system continuous in the is the eightfold system continuous in the practice? Meaning, do we practice all the limbs together, or is it a step-by-step progression from one limb to the next? Thank you for this amazing and wonderful talk, Rajaram.
Very good. Rajaram, namaste. And let me say, yes, it's unfortunate. Some people, and I've encountered this for many years, some people teach and believe that it's done in a sequential sort of way. So first you do yama, or you don't even do yama, niyama. No, first you do yama, then you do niyama, you know, and then you progress in that way and you perfect one of the limbs and you go on to the next limb. That is absolutely not true. That is absolutely not the case. You practice all the limbs simultaneously, and they feed each other. See, what does it mean? You know, you smiled when I said that. Yeah, what does it mean to practice half of the ethical system, but not the other half? It's like, I'm going to be half ethical. I'll follow these ethical principles, not those. I'm not ready for those yet. No, you practice all the ethics simultaneously. You're practicing pranayama. You're doing breath exercises. You're doing meditation. Interestingly, even samadhi, this truly exalted goal of feeling this oneness with God, where you have full absorption of your awareness in God, while its perfection will come later, you actually begin to experience glimpses of it even at the beginning. Oh, I can't tell you how many hundreds of students I've had, and they'll tell me, oh, you know, they've been practicing meditation for a month. But they'll say, oh, with this meditation for a few minutes, I felt just absolutely still and just experiencing God, and there was no interruption, and it was just pure bliss, and I was in that state uninterrupted for a few minutes. Even at the beginning, that's samadhi. you'll experience this, but this is the point. Full samadhi, of course, is experiencing that uninterrupted. But yes, to answer Rajarama's question, we practice all the limbs simultaneously. It's not sequential. Any other questions online?
Not at the moment.
Okay. Any other questions here? And I'll maybe just take one more question. Yes, please.
Could you talk a little bit about the niyama of tapas? Because I'm a little confused on exactly how that translates and what that means.
Sure. Tapas, or sometimes tapasya, they both mean the same thing. They say they have the same Sanskrit verb root. Tapas simply means austerity. So the way I've explained this, and yes, when it comes to tapas, even historically, there has been a lot of misunderstanding. And I'm talking about going back 3,000 years, going back to the time of the Buddha, before the Buddha. There's sometimes been a little bit of misunderstanding of what's meant by austerity or penance. And that is, some people have taken it too far to the point where, oh, you hear about these yogis who they'll take a vow, for example, that, yes, I will have my hand raised over my head and I will keep it like this and not take it down. Have you heard of people like this? You'll encounter these people in India, and they will do this amazing thing where they will leave their hand like this for years, to the point where the arm becomes unusable. And they think that they're doing a tapasya. In a way, they are. But it's an unnecessary pain. It's a harmful pain. That's not what is meant by tapas. Some people will take it too far. All that tapasya means, very simply, is consciously, of your own will, doing something that is difficult and challenging that you know will make you stronger. That is, in a healthy way, what tapas means. So I've given this example many times. When at one point, like 20 years ago, when I lived in Madison, Wisconsin, I lived on the 9th floor of a building. Very often, I would choose. They had elevators, but I would choose to walk up. That's a tapasya, where of my own free will, I would choose to do something that was difficult, slightly painful, not really, but, a challenge, tough on the body. But why? Understanding that it would make me stronger, understanding that it would burn away negative things, and positively, it would give me what? When you do something like that, it builds discipline, it builds focus. Even physically, it makes you stronger, etc. It makes your will stronger. So in even simple ways like that, or there are more ritualized forms of tapas. So for example, fasting. This is another very good spiritual example. This is why people will fast spiritually. They'll take a vow that, for the next 3 days, I'll have only water. No food, no anything, just water. But again, it's not with the idea of harming yourself. On the contrary, if you know how to fast correctly, it's very healthy for you. But it's hard. It's a tapas, it's a tapasya. It's something where it's a difficult challenge to do. It's uncomfortable. But at the same time, ultimately, it will make you stronger. So there are many, many different kinds of tapas. But the ultimate goal is to do it in a healthy way where you're not harming yourself, you're challenging yourself. Again, I keep going back to the gym because I love the gym. I keep using this as an example. Perfect example. You are seriously going to the gym. In other words, you have a serious long-term goal. I'm a 90-pound weakling. I want to come to the point where I'm built. You're going to give yourself pain. Literally, that's the definition of what it means to work out, to lift weights. The next day, you're going to feel it. You're going to have pain. But what kind of pain? A healthy pain. Knowing that because of that pain, my muscles grew 1/10,000th of an inch bigger that day, whatever it is. And then you do it the next day, et cetera, et cetera. So it's giving yourself pain, but with a higher goal. Does that make sense? Very good.